Somewhere on the floor of the Pacific Ocean, directly beneath a real ring of islands once used to test the most powerful weapons humans have ever built, sits a small yellow sponge in a pineapple, asleep, dreaming. He has a birthday written on a small plastic card in his wallet that should make him too young to legally have a job. He has a neighbor named after a sea creature he is not actually related to. He works for a small red crab whose teenage daughter is somehow a giant whale, and whose wife has never once been shown on screen in over 25 years. For the next 2 hours, the deepest unsolved mysteries of Bikini Bottom get unpacked one by one. The hidden histories, the buried origins, the lore the creator of the show refused to ever fully explain. Welcome to Cartoonology. Let's get started. The marine biologist who built Bikini Bottom. Long before the pineapple, long before the laugh, long before any kid in any country could hum the opening notes of a theme song that asks, "Who lives in a pineapple under the sea?" there was a young man standing in a tide pool in Dana Point, California, holding a bucket, talking to a group of school children about the small creatures that lived in the rocks at his feet. His name was Stephen Hillenburg. He was a marine biology teacher, and he had no idea that the comic book he was about to draw, just to make his lessons more fun, would one day become the most watched cartoon in the world. Stephen was born on August 21st, 1961, in Lawton, Oklahoma. His family moved to Anaheim, California when he was just a year old, and he grew up there, near the ocean. From the time he was a small child, two things gripped him completely. One was the sea, the other was drawing. He would later say that he was fascinated by the ocean before he could even properly read about it. As a kid, he would collect shells, sketch fish, and spend hours staring into water, wondering what was moving around just out of sight. When the time came for college, he had to pick. He chose the sea. In 1984, he graduated from Humboldt State University in Northern California with a degree in something called Natural Resource Planning, with a focus on marine resources. In simple terms, he studied how the ocean works, what lives in it, and how to take care of it. He also took art classes on the side, but his main path was supposed to be marine science. Right after graduation, he got a job that would change his life, even though no one knew it yet. He was hired at the Orange County Marine Institute in Dana Point, on the Southern California coast. The place is now called the Ocean Institute. His job was to teach marine biology to visiting school groups, to take kids out on whale watching boats, and to lead tours of the tide pools, those small puddles of water left behind on the rocks when the ocean pulls back at low tide. For Stephen, this was perfect. He was paid to share the thing he loved most with kids who, often for the first time in their lives, were getting to look at real sea creatures up close. He taught about tide pools, he taught about whales, he taught about how different sea animals adapt to live in different parts of the ocean. He helped run a whale skeleton exhibit at the Institute, and he supervised whale watching trips out on the open water. One day, one of the educational directors at the Institute came to him with a small request. They wanted a fun teaching tool for kids visiting the tide pools, something that would help young children remember the names and habits of the creatures they were seeing. They asked Stephen if he might be willing to draw a small comic book about it. He said yes. In 1989, he sat down and created a comic he called the Intertidal Zone. The Intertidal Zone is the technical name for the area of the beach that is sometimes underwater and sometimes not, depending on the tide. It is one of the busiest places in the ocean, full of strange little creatures, and Stephen wanted kids to fall in love with it. The comic was hosted by two characters. One was a shrimp called Rocky. The other was a sea sponge named Bob. Bob the sponge looked nothing like the SpongeBob the world would later come to know. He was just a small, round, realistic-looking sea sponge with sunglasses, floating in the corner of the page and talking to the reader. He had no arms. He had no legs. He was, quite literally, just a sponge that talked. But the comic was full of other characters too. There was a sea cucumber. There was a starfish. There were tiny crabs and snails and other small ocean creatures, each drawn with a face and a voice and a little personality, each teaching the reader something true about real marine biology. Stephen used these characters to explain how starfish move, how crabs hide, how snails eat, how the tide changes the lives of every animal in the zone. The kids at the Institute loved it. Stephen tried to get the comic published as a real book. No publisher was interested. The comic sat on his desk, used only for school visits, never reaching a wider audience. He did not know it then, but inside that small, unpublished comic was the entire future of his life. After 2 years of teaching, Stephen began to feel a pull in another direction. The drawing had taken hold of him. He decided to leave the Institute in 1987 and follow the other thing he loved. loved. He enrolled at the California Institute of the Arts to study animation. There, he made a short film called Wormholes, which was about a real science idea, the theory of relativity, drawn in a strange and dreamy style. The film went to animation festivals. At one of those festivals, in Ottawa, a man named Joe Murray approached him in a hotel lobby and asked if he would be interested in working on a new cartoon being developed for a kids channel called Nickelodeon. The cartoon was called Rocko's Modern Life. Steven took the job. He worked on Rocko from 1993 to 1996 as a director and storyboard artist. It was here that he met many of the people who would become important to his future. He met Tom Kenny, a voice actor with a strange and elastic voice. He met Doug Lawrence, who everyone just called Mr. Lawrence, who could play almost any kind of character. He met Derek Dryman, who would become one of his closest creative partners. He learned how a real animated TV show was made, from start to finish. When Rocko's Modern Life ended in 1996, the people around Steven began to push him. Some of his co-workers had seen the old Intertidal Zone comic. They thought there was something there. They told him he should pitch his own show. One of those people, a writer named Martin Olson, found pages of the comic on Steven's desk one day and told him directly that the Sponge character should become a full cartoon. Steven was unsure at first, but he listened. He took the Sponge from the comic and he began to redesign it. The realistic round Bob the Sponge would not work as a main character on television. He needed something funnier, something that read better on screen. So Steven made a choice that ended up shaping the show forever. Instead of drawing a real sea sponge, he drew a kitchen sponge, the flat, square yellow kind that people use to wash dishes. He gave it arms, he gave it legs, he gave it big buck teeth and a wide smile. He named the character Sponge Boy. Almost everything else came from that old comic in some form. The starfish became Patrick. The pink coral color of Patrick was a deliberate choice, picked by a man who had spent years staring at real starfish. Steven would later say that he made Patrick a starfish because real starfish look slow and dumb on the surface, but underneath they are actually very active hunters, which fit Patrick perfectly. The character looked harmless, but you never quite knew what he was thinking. A whale character came next, Pearl. She was inspired directly by the whale skeleton exhibit at the Ocean Institute and the years Steven had spent supervising whale watching trips out on the boats. He had stared at whales, he had thought about whales, he had explained whales to children for years. So when he sat down to design the daughter of the Krusty Krab owner, a whale was simply what came out. Squidward came from a love of the octopus. Steven liked the bulbous head of the real animal because it made the character look like he thought he was smart, even when he was being silly. He drew him with 6 legs instead of 8, just because it was easier to animate. The name Squidward came from the actor Roger Bumpus, and the team deciding that calling him Octoward did not sound right. Karen Plankton, the talking computer wife of Plankton, was named after Steven's real wife, Karen Hillenburg, a chef who taught at a cooking school in Culver City, California. He told people she was the funniest person he knew, so when he needed a name for a sharp-tongued computer, he used hers. The setting was just as carefully chosen as the characters. Steven wanted the show to take place underwater, of course, but he wanted it to feel like a real city, with real shops, real jobs, real bus stops, real traffic. The town would be called Bikini Bottom. Above it, on the surface, would sit a small ring-shaped island. That island, in the real world, is called Bikini Atoll in the Pacific Ocean. The image of 3 palm trees on a tiny beach, the one that opens almost every episode, is a drawing of that real place. All of this Steven pulled together into a pitch. By the summer of 1997, he was ready to walk into Nickelodeon and try to sell them a cartoon about a sea sponge. He did not bring a normal pitch. He brought a small underwater tank with model figures of his characters inside it. He wore a Hawaiian shirt. He played Hawaiian music in the background. He moved the little models around in the tank as he talked, like a child playing on the floor of his bedroom, walking the executives through the world of his show, one scene at a time. The Nickelodeon executive who watched it, Eric Coleman, would later say it was pretty amazing. There was one big problem, though. The show was originally going to be called SpongeBoy Ahoy. The main character was going to be named SpongeBoy. The voice acting for the very first version of the pilot was even recorded with that name, but Nickelodeon's legal team did some checking and found out that the name SpongeBoy was already being used by a real product, a kind of pencil eraser, so the name had to change. Steven sat down again and came up with a new one, SpongeBob SquarePants. The last name SquarePants referred to the character's square shape. He thought it had a nice ring to it. The change was made, the show kept going. Through all of this, Steven carried with him one quiet idea. He wanted the show to be funny, he wanted it to be wild, but under all of that, he wanted the message to be simple. In one of his earliest interviews about the cartoon, he said that the show's whole point was that innocence prevails, even though in real life it does not always. He wanted SpongeBob to be a person, even an underwater one, who saw the world with kindness, no matter how strange or unfair the world got around him. That belief in the goodness of a happy person in a hard world came from somewhere real inside Steven. He also wanted to honor the ocean. Every choice in the show, from the names of the streets to the shape of the houses to the kinds of jobs the characters held, was rooted in his love for marine biology. The Krusty Krab, Goo Lagoon, Jellyfish Fields, Conch Street, the whole map of Bikini Bottom is the imagination of a man who once spent his days teaching children the names of the small animals living in puddles on a beach. The pilot script for the new show was finished on May 12, 1997. The final storyboard was completed on June 3, 1997. The first version of the episode, called Help Wanted, was delivered to Nickelodeon on September 18, 1997. From there, it would sit in waiting for almost 2 years before ever airing on television. During that time, the show would be tweaked, recolored, slightly rewritten, and slowly polished into the version that would finally air on May 1st, 1999, after the Kids' Choice Awards. But getting there would not be simple. Hidden inside that first pilot was a problem so strange and so unlucky that it would keep the very first episode of SpongeBob SquarePants off the official DVD set of its own first season for years. The reason had nothing to do with the writing, the animation, or the characters. It had to do with a single song, a song chosen at the last minute by a singer who had passed away just weeks before the pilot was being written on a stage in Minnesota mid-performance. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. His name was Tiny Tim, and the strange story of how his voice ended up on the very first SpongeBob episode and what happened next is the story of how the show almost got buried before anyone ever got to see it. Section 2, the pilot that almost didn't happen and the song that killed it. To understand how strange the journey of the first SpongeBob episode really was, you have to go back to a small theater in Massachusetts on the night of September 28, 1996. A man named Herbert Carey, better known by his stage name Tiny Tim, was in the middle of performing at a ukulele festival. He was 64 years old. He had been a famous singer for almost 30 years, known for his high voice, his long curly hair, and his strange and gentle way of singing old songs from the 1920s and 30s as if no time had passed at all. That night, just as he started to sing, his heart gave out. He suffered a heart attack right there on stage. He recovered, but only briefly. 2 months later, on November 30th, 1996, he had another heart attack while performing in Minneapolis. This one took him. He died at the age of 64. A few hundred miles away, around that same time, Stephen Hillenburg and Derek Dryman were sitting in a room outside the Nickelodeon offices, working on a pilot script for a cartoon about a sea sponge. They had no idea Tiny Tim had just died. They had no idea that one of his songs, a cover he had recorded almost 30 years earlier, was about to become a part of their show. And they had no idea that this single decision was going to cause them years of trouble. The pilot they were writing was called Help Wanted. It was the very first episode of SpongeBob SquarePants. The story, in simple terms, follows SpongeBob trying to get his dream job at the Krusty Krab. He shows up. He gets pushed out by Squidward, who does not want him there. Then, a giant crowd of hungry fish, drawn as anchovies, suddenly storm the restaurant demanding food. SpongeBob saves the day by cooking burgers for all of them at incredible speed. The whole cooking sequence was meant to be a big, funny, joyful montage set to an upbeat song. The question was, which song? Steven had a tape someone had given him months earlier, full of different kinds of music. He liked to play it in the background while he worked. One of the tracks on that tape was an old Tiny Tim recording from 1968, off Tiny Tim's first album called God Bless Tiny Tim. The song was a cover of a much older tune from a 1930 movie. Its name was Livin' in the Sunlight, Lovin' in the Moonlight. It was bright, cheerful, almost too cheerful, sung in Tiny Tim's strange, high voice that sounded like nothing else on the planet. Steven played it for Derek one day to show him the kind of feeling he wanted in the show. Big, sunny, almost silly happiness. Derek understood right away. When the time came to pick a song for the cooking scene in Help Wanted, the two of them had the same idea. idea at the same time. They would use this Tiny Tim recording, the exact one, the cover from the album. There was just one small detail. They did not actually have the rights to use it. In television, you cannot just put any song you want into your show. If a song was recorded by someone else, you have to ask permission, and usually you have to pay for it. The estate of the person who sang it, meaning their family or the people who handle their music after they pass away, has to agree. Without that permission, the song cannot legally be part of the episode. For now, though, the pilot was just being made for Nickelodeon executives to look at, not for the public, so the team kept moving forward. They edited the song into the cooking scene. The pilot took shape. The team eventually got the rights to use the song just for the pilot itself, but the copy they had to work with was the one off Steven's old tape, which was apparently in pretty rough shape. The story goes that a Nickelodeon employee finally came to the rescue because she had a connection with someone who had access to a much cleaner master copy of the song. With that, the cooking sequence finally came together properly. Derek would later say something quietly sad about the whole thing. Tiny Tim had died right around the time they were writing the pilot. He never knew his song was being used. He never got to hear his strange, high voice playing over the top of an underwater sea sponge frying burgers. The song lived on, but the man who had sung it never knew where it had ended up. The pilot itself is full of small things that look strange to anyone watching the show today. SpongeBob's bed is on the right side of the room instead of the left. His blanket is solid blue instead of purple with flowers. He has fewer holes in his body than he would have later. His voice is a little lower. Patrick's voice is a little deeper. Mr. Krabs' eyelids are bright pink instead of just red. Squidward is wearing a regular orange shirt instead of the brown-orange one he would later wear all the time. His skin is paler. His laugh sounds different. Even the splat sound effect, the sound that plays when something hits the floor, is a different splat from the one the show would settle on. These little differences exist because the pilot was made nearly 2 full years before the rest of the season. By the time the show was actually picked up and put into production, the team had already changed many small things, and the pilot had to be quietly updated to match. A new title card was added. The opening credits were tweaked. Tiny errors in the credits were fixed, like the spelling of one of the artists' names, Eric Visa, which had been spelled wrong the first time as Eric Visa. Steven brought along his other crew from Rocko's Modern Life. Tom Kenny, the man who would voice SpongeBob, was an old friend from that show. So was Doug Lawrence, who everyone called Mr. Lawrence. Steven had originally invited Doug to audition for every single character in the show. Doug auditioned for all of them. Steven ended up giving him the role of Plankton, the tiny green villain. The reason Plankton has the voice he does, that scratchy, over-the-top, almost cartoonish villain voice, is because Doug was a versatile actor, and Steven liked him in that role best. There is a small story from the audition process that has stuck around for years. While they were showing Doug the storyboard for the pilot, Doug started reading SpongeBob's lines back to them in a deep voice, the kind that sounds a little like a tiger from a cereal commercial. Derek thought it was funny, and they kept the moment in the final episode. There is a scene early in Help Wanted where SpongeBob, walking into the Krusty Krab for the first time, suddenly drops into a deep voice and says, "I'm ready," in the most overly serious way. That moment exists because Doug, sitting in a room a year earlier, had read the line that way as a joke. There is one more thing about the pilot that almost no one outside the team knew about for years. The show was originally going to be called something completely different. The main character, in the very first version, was named Sponge Boy. The show was going to be called Sponge Boy Ahoy. The voice acting for that very first early version of the pilot had even already been recorded with that name. But before the show could move forward, Nickelodeon's legal team did a search to make sure the name was clear to use. It was not. A real product already existed under the name Sponge Boy. It was a kind of pencil eraser, of all things. The company that made it owned the trademark, and Nickelodeon could not legally use the same name for a cartoon character. The whole show had to be renamed. Steven sat down and went through possibilities until he came up with SpongeBob SquarePants. The SquarePants part was simply a description of the character's shape. He thought it sounded right. The team agreed. The voice work had to be redone with the new name. Sponge Boy was gone. SpongeBob was born. There was also the question of who SpongeBob would even be. From the very start, Nickelodeon and Steven had a serious disagreement about this. The Nickelodeon executives wanted SpongeBob to be a child. They thought a child character would work better for a kids channel. Steven completely disagreed. He had always pictured SpongeBob as a grown-up, an adult who had his own house and his own job and lived on his own. The argument argument got so serious that Steven almost walked away from the whole show. He was ready to give up. A compromise was found, and it is one of the most important compromises in television history. Steven agreed that SpongeBob could go to a school, but it would not be a regular school. It would be a boating school, where adults learned to drive boats, run by a teacher named Mrs. Puff. That way, SpongeBob could keep going to lessons and failing his test, which was funny, but he could still be an adult living his own life outside the classroom. This is why, to this day, SpongeBob is a working adult who drives himself to a job every morning, but somehow also still attends classes with a teacher. The strange middle ground was a real-life negotiation that saved the show. When the pilot was finally finished, and Steven and the team gathered in a room with Nickelodeon executives to watch it, the reaction was apparently something to see. One Nickelodeon official, Albie Hecht, would later say it was a performance he wished he had on tape. The execs were so impressed that, after the episode ended, they immediately watched it a second time. Right there, in that room, the decision was made. SpongeBob SquarePants would become a full series. The pilot was completed in 1997. It would not air for almost 2 more years. On May 1st, 1999, after the broadcast of the Kids' Choice Awards on Nickelodeon, the world saw SpongeBob SquarePants for the very first time. The episode that aired was Help Wanted, paired with 2 other small segments called Reef Blower and Tea at the Tree Dome. Roughly 3 million households watched. Reviews were mostly positive. The show officially began its full regular run a few months later, on July 17th, 1999, with a different episode called Bubble Stand. But that small, old Tiny Tim song would not let go. Years later, when Nickelodeon prepared to release the first season of SpongeBob SquarePants on DVD in 2003, they ran into a wall. The pilot, Help Wanted, contained that licensed Tiny Tim song. To put it on a DVD that millions of people would buy, the company would have to pay Tiny Tim's estate a much larger fee for those new home video rights. According to Derek Dryman, Nickelodeon decided not to pay for it, so they did something almost no one expects when they buy a complete first season. They simply left the first episode out. The complete first season DVD of SpongeBob SquarePants, released in 2003, did not include Help Wanted. The very first episode of the show, the entire reason any of it existed, was missing from its own season set. Anyone buying the DVD would jump straight from no first episode at all into the second episode, Bubble Stand, with no explanation. For people who did not know about the music rights issue, it was deeply confusing. The cause was a small contract problem from years earlier, sitting under the show like an old splinter. It took 2 more years for that to be fixed. In 2005, when the third season DVD was released, Help Wanted was finally included as a bonus feature. It was eventually placed back into its proper spot on later DVD collections, like the first 100 episodes set in 2009. On a German release of the first season DVD, the episode had actually been included from the start because the rules were different there. But for many fans in the United States, it took a very long time before they could legally own the very first episode of the show on disc. Even today, when SpongeBob's official YouTube channel posts clips from Help Wanted, they sometimes swap out the Tiny Tim song with a different track. The original cooking scene, the one Steven and Derek built around the strange and joyful voice of a man who never knew his song was being used, is still occasionally replaced with a sped-up old jazz tune called 12th Street Rag. The shadow of that old tape and that lost singer never quite went away. When the pilot finally hit television screens, though, it carried with it something else. Something that had nothing to do with songs, or contracts, or DVD rights. The show was set in a place called Bikini Bottom, sitting in the ocean directly underneath a small, ring-shaped island called Bikini Atoll. That choice, that real-world location, came from Steven's love of the Pacific Ocean. It seemed sweet. It seemed harmless. A pretty island with 3 palm trees, drawn into the title card of every episode. But Bikini Atoll, the real place, has a history. A real, terrible history. One that involved nuclear weapons, displaced families, and an explosion so powerful it equaled 1,000 bombs going off at once. For decades, fans have wondered if the show was somehow connected to that history. Was Bikini Bottom built on the site of nuclear testing? Were the talking sea creatures the result of radiation? For years, people from the show denied it. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. Then one one day, almost 25 years after the pilot first aired, one of the show's longest-running writers sat down for an interview and said something that changed how millions of viewers would see Bikini Bottom forever. Section 3. Bikini Atoll, the confirmed sinister origin. In the middle of the Pacific Ocean, roughly halfway between the islands of Hawaii and the country of the Philippines, sits a small ring of land surrounded by the sea. From the air, it looks like a thin curve of beach and palm trees, broken into pieces floating on the water. The ring is made up of 23 tiny islands, all formed by coral, all shaped over thousands of years by the slow work of tides and weather. The ring of islands is called an atoll. The name of this particular one is Bikini Atoll. It is a real place. You can find it on a map. It belongs to a country called the Marshall Islands. For most of recorded history, it was home to a small group of people called the Bikinians, who lived simple lives there, fishing in the lagoon, growing coconuts, raising families. They had been there for generations. In 1946, that life ended. After the end of World War II, the United States military was looking for a quiet, far-off place to test nuclear weapons. Bikini Atoll was perfect for them. It was small, it was remote, it was surrounded by ocean. From a military planning view, the only people who lived there were a small group, around 167 Bikinians, who could be moved somewhere else. So that is what happened. In February of 1946, the United States government approached the people of Bikini and asked them to leave their homes for a little while, promising they could come back once the testing was finished. The Bikinians, trusting that promise, agreed. They were moved to another island called Rongerik, far to the east. Once they got there, they discovered something terrible. There was almost no food. The plants on Rongerik did not produce enough to feed them. The fish in the surrounding water were not the same kind they were used to catching. Within a year, the Bikinians were starving. They sent for help. They were eventually moved again, then again, then again. They never went back to Bikini Atoll. Almost 80 years later, their descendants still cannot live there. The reason is simple. The testing started, and it never really stopped causing damage. Between 1946 and 1958, the United States carried out 67 nuclear weapons tests in the surrounding area, with 23 of those happening directly on or near Bikini Atoll itself. Some of the bombs were dropped from planes. Some were placed on ships. One of the most famous tests, called Baker, was set off underwater. In the lagoon at the center of the atoll, the explosion sent up a column of water and steam taller than most mountains. A photographer captured the moment in a famous photograph that has been printed in textbooks all over the world. The shape of that explosion, with its curved white pillar of water and its mushroom-like top, is one of the most well-known images of the entire nuclear age. The biggest test of them all happened on March 1st, 1954. It was called Castle Bravo. It was meant to be a powerful test, but the people who built the bomb miscalculated badly. The actual explosion was many times bigger than expected. By the time it was over, 3 small islands had been completely destroyed. They were simply gone, vaporized into the sky. The blast was equal to about 1,000 of the bombs that had been dropped on Hiroshima at the end of World War II. The radiation from that single test spread for hundreds of miles, sickening people on nearby islands who had no idea anything was happening. To this day, Bikini Atoll cannot be lived on. The radiation in the soil, in the plants, in the coconuts will not go away for thousands of years. In the 1970s, the United States government tried to bring some Bikinians back to their home. By 1978, after testing showed they had absorbed more radioactive material into their bodies than any group of humans on Earth, they had to be removed again. The original Bikinian families became people without a home country, scattered across other islands, living in exile from a place they could see on a map but could never return to. This is the real history of Bikini Atoll. Now, with all of that in mind, look again at the opening of every SpongeBob episode. A small island appears with 3 tall palm trees on it, sitting peacefully in the middle of a calm blue ocean. The camera dives down beneath the waves into a colorful underwater town full of talking sea creatures. The town is named Bikini Bottom. It sits, by the show's own admission, directly under that small island, deep on the floor of the ocean. For years, fans wondered if Steven Hillenburg had picked that location on purpose. He was, after all, a marine biologist. He knew the geography of the Pacific. He would have known exactly what Bikini Atoll was. He would have known what had happened there. To pick a name like Bikini Bottom for the home of a cartoon full of strange, mutated, weirdly shaped sea creatures who could talk and walk and live full human lives, all sitting at the bottom of a real-world nuclear test test site seemed like too much to be a coincidence. A theory began to grow online, especially on the website Reddit, starting around the early 2000s. The theory was simple. Bikini Bottom was the result of nuclear testing. The reason the fish could talk, the reason a sponge could be a person, the reason a starfish could go grocery shopping, was that the radiation from the bombs had altered the sea life living in the ocean below. The mutations had given them the ability to think, to walk, to build cities, to drive boats. The cheerful underwater town, in this theory, was actually the unintended creation of one of the most destructive military programs in human history. The theory had a lot of small details that seemed to back it up. Sandy Cheeks, the squirrel character, wears a full bodysuit that protects her from the water and gives her air to breathe, almost like the protective gear nuclear scientists wear. Some early fans pointed out that small Navy ships used to keep small animals on board during nuclear tests, sometimes including chipmunks and squirrels, to study how living creatures handled the conditions. The theory suggested Sandy might be descended from such a creature, which would explain her advanced suit and her unusual strength. There is even a place in the show called Rock Bottom, a much darker, weirder, more frightening underwater town that sits even deeper than Bikini Bottom. Some fans pointed out that an underwater nuclear blast would create a deep crater on the ocean floor, and a town built inside such a crater might be even more strangely affected by the radiation than the one above it. For a long time, this was all just a fan theory. People played with the idea online. Compilation videos were made, articles were written, but nobody official from the show would actually confirm any of it. In fact, several people connected to the show actively pushed back. Tom Kenny, the voice of SpongeBob, did an interview in 2015 in which he confirmed that, yes, the underwater city was named after Bikini Atoll, and yes, that was the real geographic location of the show. But he stopped short of saying that the nuclear testing had anything to do with why the characters were the way they were. The actor Roger Bumpus, the voice of Squidward, would later say in an interview that he had heard the theory and had been telling fans for years that it was not actually true. Then, in late 2024, something happened that flipped the entire conversation upside down. The men's magazine Esquire put out an interview with the cast and crew of SpongeBob, marking the show's 25th anniversary. The actors gathered, they reminisced, they told old stories, and then, somewhere around the 4-minute mark of the conversation, the topic of the Bikini Atoll theory came up. Roger Bumpus, the voice of Squidward, brought it up almost casually. He said something like he had always liked the theory that the whole show was related to the atomic testing in Bikini Atoll. Doug Lawrence, the voice of Plankton and a longtime writer for the show, going back to the beginning, looked at him and said something the fans had been waiting almost 20 years to hear. He said it was true. Roger looked surprised. He said he had been telling people for years that it was not true. Doug repeated himself. He confirmed, on the record, that the connection was canon, meaning officially part of the show's true backstory. He said it had been part of the fun of the show all along, asking how far they could take that idea. That alone would have been enough to make headlines, but Doug then added something that took the whole thing a step further. He explained that the very first idea, back when the show was being developed in the late 1990s, had been even darker. The original concept was that the entire surface of Earth had been destroyed by some kind of war, leaving the planet above the water dead and empty. Bikini Bottom, deep underwater, was meant to be the only thing that had survived. The cheerful, colorful, joyful little town of talking sea creatures was supposed to be, in the very first version of the show's universe, the last living place on the entire planet. Doug was clear that this idea had been scrapped early on, while the show was still being developed in season 1. The team had decided not to go in that direction. As the show grew, as humans began to appear here and there, like the cartoonist who drops his pencil into the sea in the episode Frankendoodle, like the appearance of David Hasselhoff in the first SpongeBob movie, like Patchy the Pirate in his various live-action segments, it became clear that the world above water was alive and well. The post-apocalyptic idea was put away in a drawer, but the rest of the theory, the part about the radiation and the mutated sea creatures, stayed canon. Doug confirmed it directly. The show takes place in the underwater area below Bikini Atoll, specifically because of the real-life nuclear testing that happened there. The strange, talkative, anthropomorphic life of Bikini Bottom is, by the show's own internal lore, a result of those bombs. There is one more small detail that fans have pointed out for years, and it now seems even more pointed in light of Doug's confirmation. Whenever a major explosion happens in the show, an actual blast of fire and water and shockwave, the shape of the explosion explosion almost always matches the famous photograph of the underwater Baker test from 1946. The same wide column, the same mushroom shape, the same burst pattern. Animators on the show have replicated that exact image in scene after scene, as if quietly carrying that real-world memory into a children's cartoon. Once you know to look for it, you can see it in episodes going back to the very early seasons. The image keeps showing up. It is almost like the show is leaving a small flag at the spot, marking it for anyone who knows the history. This connection has also given a new layer of meaning to certain other parts of the show. Sandy's heavy protective suit, for example, her tree dome filled with air, where she can take her helmet off and breathe normally, looks slightly different now. So does her incredible strength compared to the smaller, frailer Bikini Bottom residents. So does her American flag and her Texas pride. The idea that she might be descended from a creature once kept aboard a Navy vessel during the testing, while still just a fan idea, fits surprisingly well with the official confirmation. Rock Bottom, the strange, darker town from a season 1 episode of the same name, also reads differently now. In that episode, SpongeBob and Patrick get lost on a trip home and end up in a town much deeper underwater, where the residents look strange, speak in a different way, and behave according to rules SpongeBob does not understand. Many fans had long suggested Rock Bottom was the result of the deepest crater left by the underwater bomb tests. The show has never officially confirmed that, and it remains a fan idea. But in a world where Bikini Bottom itself is officially the result of nuclear fallout, the idea that even stranger places might exist nearby seems less far-fetched. The connection between SpongeBob and the real Bikini Atoll has another quiet importance, one that has nothing to do with theories. The Bikinians, the real people who lost their home to the bombs, are still alive. Their families are still scattered. Every year on March 1st, the anniversary of the Castle Bravo blast, students in the Marshall Islands gather for a day of remembrance. Some teachers there have written about asking American students what they know about Bikini Atoll, and the answer they often hear, instead of the real history, is the name of a cartoon. SpongeBob lives in Bikini Bottom. Few people, when they say that name, are thinking about what really happened there. In a strange way, the show has kept the name of Bikini Atoll alive in popular memory, even if the meaning has been buried underneath. Stephen Hillenburg, the marine biologist who built the world of the show, almost certainly knew exactly what he was doing when he placed his cheerful little undersea city directly beneath that real ring of islands. In choosing Bikini Atoll as his backdrop, he wove a real-world history into the foundations of his cartoon, where it has sat for over 25 years. So the underwater city has its origin story now, officially confirmed by one of its longest-running writers. The town was born of nuclear fire. Its residents are the children of that fire. The cheerful yellow sponge dancing in his pineapple, in some quiet corner of the show's deepest lore, is one of the strange new lives that came out of the most destructive weapons humans ever built. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. Which raises an obvious next question. If Bikini Bottom is full of mutated sea creatures, what kind of sea creature is the strangest one of them all? A bald, tall, six-legged figure who lives next door to a sponge and a starfish, plays the clarinet badly, and is named after an animal he is not actually related to at all. Section 4. Squidward isn't a squid, and other things hidden in his name. The name is a lie. For more than 25 years, millions of people have grown up watching a cartoon character named Squidward Tentacles. The name has the word squid right in it, twice almost, if you count the way the second part of his name, Tentacles, makes you think of long, curling arms reaching out through dark water. Children watching the show have always assumed the obvious. The character with squid in his name must be a squid. It is right there. It could not be more clearly stated, except it is not true. Squidward is not a squid. He has never been a squid. He was never meant to be a squid. The man who created him said so himself. The voice actor who played him said so. The animators who drew him said so. Every official source agrees. Squidward is an octopus, just an octopus, pretending for some reason to have a name that suggests otherwise. The story of how this happened is one of the strangest small mysteries hiding inside SpongeBob. It involves a creator who loved real ocean animals, an actor who hated the sound of a different name, an animation team trying to take a shortcut, and a long history of small clues hidden in the show that have been pointing at the truth all along for anyone who knew where to look. To understand the choice, you have to go back to Stephen Hillenburg again. When he sat down in the late 1990s to design the main characters of Bikini Bottom, he made a quiet, personal rule. Every member of the main cast had to be a different kind of sea creature. SpongeBob was a sponge, Patrick was a starfish, Sandy was a squirrel from above water, Mr. Krabs was a crab, Pearl was a whale, Plankton was, well, plankton. He needed one more main character to round out the cast, and he wanted a creature with a strong personality match for the role he had in mind. The role was the grumpy neighbor, the character who would live between SpongeBob and Patrick on Conch Street and be slowly driven out of his mind by their cheerfulness. Steven needed a creature that looked the part, something that read, just at a glance, as an artistic, slightly uppity, slightly sad sort of person, someone who thought he was better than the world around him, even if the world around him did not quite agree. Steven picked the octopus. The reason was simple, and he stated it plainly in interviews and in the special features that came with the first SpongeBob movie. He liked the bulbous head of the octopus, the big rounded shape. He felt that an animal with such a large head looked, from a distance, like it ought to be smart, or at least like it thought it was smart. That fit Squidward perfectly. A creature whose entire personality is built around the idea that he is better, more cultured, more talented, more sensitive than anyone else in town. The octopus's puffed up head matched the puffed up self-importance Steven wanted for the character. So that was the first decision. Squidward was an octopus. From the moment Steven's pencil first moved on a page, the character was an octopus. There was never any version of him in the early sketches where he was anything else. Then came the next decision, the number of legs. In real life, an octopus has 8 arms. The name octopus literally comes from old words meaning 8 feet. It is the most basic, most well-known fact about the animal. Any child with a picture book about the ocean can tell you. 8 arms, 8 legs, 8 tentacles, whatever you want to call them. There are 8 of them. When Steven and his animators sat down to design Squidward as a moving cartoon character, they ran into a real problem. Drawing 8 separate arms on a character, in every frame, in every shot, in every scene, for episode after episode of an animated television show would be exhausting. Animators draw thousands of frames a year. Each extra limb means more lines, more shapes, more time, more cost. 8 arms on a character who appears in almost every episode would have slowed everything down. There was a second issue too. Steven and his team felt that giving Squidward all 8 arms made him look weighed down, heavy, burdened. 8 arms hanging off a single body looked too much, especially on a character meant to walk around upright like a person. The team tried it. It just did not look right. So they made a choice. They simply gave Squidward 6 arms instead of 8. 2 of them functioned as arms in the normal sense, sticking out from the top of his body. The other 4 hung down as legs. From most angles, this gave him a clean, simple shape that animators could draw quickly and that worked well on screen. The decision was made purely for animation convenience. Steven later confirmed this directly. He said it was just simpler to draw him with 6 legs. This is why, in almost every episode of SpongeBob you have ever seen, Squidward has only 6 visible limbs. It is not because he is a different species. It is not because he lost 2 in some accident. It is not a deep clue about his backstory. It is just the result of a team of animators trying to keep their workload reasonable. There are exactly 2 episodes in the entire run of the show where Squidward is briefly drawn with all 8 of his proper limbs. The first is a season 2 episode called Pressure, in which a short live-action segment shows him with the full 8. The second is a season 9 episode called Sold, where he again briefly appears with 8. These 2 moments are the only time the show ever quietly admits, with its visuals, what the character actually is. That brings us to the name, Squidward. If Steven had been completely consistent about it, the character should have been named something that pointed at his real species, something with the word octopus in it. The team did consider this. They thought about it. They tried saying it out loud. The name they considered was Octoword. It did not survive. Roger Bumpus, the voice actor who plays Squidward, would later say in interviews that the name Octoword simply did not work. It did not roll off the tongue. It sounded clunky. It sounded wrong. It just was not a name a person would actually call somebody, even in a cartoon. So the team threw it out and went looking for something else. What they ended up with was a small joke. They took the name of a different sea creature, the squid, which is closely related to the octopus and shares some of the same general shape. They added the human first name Edward to the end of it, the way the names SpongeBob and Patrick combine common names with descriptions. The result was Squidward, Squid plus Edward, a name that sounded right, that flowed nicely, that fit a character who would speak in a slightly stuffy and overly serious voice. The fact that the name pointed at the wrong species was, to Steven and his team, simply not a big deal. The character was an octopus. The name said squid. It was a small inside joke that the show would continue forever. Steven confirmed in a special feature included with the first SpongeBob movie DVD that the character is called Squidward the Octopus, full stop. He said it on camera, in his own voice, looking directly at the audience. The show itself has admitted this fact dozens of times across the years. There are real episodes with real spoken dialogue where the truth slips out for anyone listening carefully. In the episode The Play's the Thing, while reciting a line, Squidward refers to himself as having been born an octopus into the world. In the episode Sweet and Sour Squid, the villain Plankton calls Squidward an octopus to his face. In the episode Patrick the Game, Squidward says outright that he does not have a fin bone because he is an octopus. In the episode Lame and Fortune, a customer at the Krusty Krab is shocked and refers to him directly as the octopus with the big nose. In the episode Squidiot Box, SpongeBob himself tells Squidward that he is an octopus and that he is full of ink. In a crossover episode involving the character Jeffy, the truth is stated again, with Jeffy telling SpongeBob and Patrick that even though their neighbor's name is Squidward, he is an octopus. These are not fan theories. These are real, recorded lines of dialogue spoken by the characters themselves in canon episodes of the show. The show knows. The characters know. It has never been a secret. The name is just the name. Squidward also has a full real name in the show, one most casual viewers do not know. His middle name has bounced around between 2 letters across the show's run. In most appearances, including the ones spoken by Roger Bumpus himself, his middle initial is given as J, but in one episode called Professor Squidward, his middle initial appears as Q. Some fans have decided to think of it as standing for Quincy, partly because the show has occasionally suggested that name. The character may simply have 2 middle names, or the show, never very strict about its own continuity, may have just changed its mind. Either way, Squidward Quincy Tentacles, or Squidward J Tentacles, is the kind of fancy, long, full name that fits a character who thinks of himself as a great artist trapped in a small town. His family, when the show has bothered to show it, also reveals more about him than he usually lets on. The Tentacles family, going back through history in the show's deeper lore, has been royal. There is an ancient relative named Squog who lived alongside the prehistoric ancestors of SpongeBob and Patrick. There is a medieval ancestor named Squidly who served as a royal jester in the court of King Krabs, an ancestor of Mr. Krabs. There is a western, cowboy-era ancestor named Hopalong who tended bar at a place called the Krusty Cantina. Across the centuries, the Tentacles family has been tied to the SquarePants and Star families and to the Krabs family in a long thread of shared history that stretches all the way back to the earliest days of life under the sea. Squidward also has parents, named Jeff and Mrs. Tentacles. He has cousins, including a strangely cheerful one named Squidmund. He has the famous rival Squilliam Fancy Son, the richer and more successful version of him, who appears in episodes like Band Geeks. The character of Squilliam, by the way, is more accurately named than Squidward is. Squilliam, whose name comes from squid plus William, is also drawn as an octopus, like Squidward. The naming joke goes both ways. There is one more thing about Squidward worth knowing, one of those small backstage choices that quietly shapes the character every time he appears on screen. Steven Hillenburg, when he first designed the character, considered giving him the ability to squirt ink, since real octopuses do that when they are scared or upset. But the team decided not to. According to Steven himself, every time they animated him squirting ink, it just looked like he was having an embarrassing accident in his pants. So the idea was dropped almost completely. There are only a couple of episodes, like Giant Squidward and Ink Lemonade, where the inking joke gets used at all. In every other appearance, Squidward keeps his ink to himself. The way Squidward walks, the small, wet, sticky sound his feet make as he moves across the floor, is also a small piece of design history. Every main character in SpongeBob has a unique footstep sound. SpongeBob has his squishy steps. Patrick has the slap of bare feet on sand. Mr. Krabs has the click-click of his crab feet. Squidward's footsteps were created by the show's Foley team, the people who record sound effects, by rubbing hot water bottles together. The soft sucking sound that gets made by the wet rubber, almost like an octopus's suction cups, gripping and releasing the floor, is what plays under every single shot of him walking. It is a small detail, but it is a real one. Every step Squidward takes in the show is is, in the real world, the sound of two warm rubber bottles being rubbed against each other. So the character with squid in his name is not a squid. He has 6 arms instead of 8 because animators wanted to save time. He squirts no ink because the team thought it looked rude. He walks on hot water bottles. He comes from a 1,000-year-old line of jesters, cowboys, and royalty, and his rival is more accurately named than he is. And every time someone in the show calls him an octopus, which has happened in episode after episode for over 25 years, the show is quietly admitting the joke that has been hiding in his name from the very first day. A grumpy octopus living next door to a sponge and a starfish, going to work at a fast food restaurant under the bottom of the sea, working a register day after day, stuck in a job he hates, dreaming of being a famous artist, served by the same boss every shift. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. That boss has his own mysteries. A short, red, money-loving crab who came from somewhere, who built the most popular restaurant in town, and who somehow, in defiance of every rule of nature, has a teenage daughter who is not a crab at all. She is something much larger, much louder, much harder to explain. And her mother, the woman who is supposedly responsible for the strangest family in all of Bikini Bottom, has never once appeared on screen. Section 5. The Mystery of Pearl's Mother, and Why It Will Never Be Solved. Mr. Krabs is a crab. This much the show makes very clear. He has a hard red shell, he has 2 large pinching claws, he walks sideways like a real crab does. He lives in a hollowed-out anchor on the ocean floor. He runs the Krusty Krab, a fast food restaurant named after his species. His full name is Eugene H. Krabs, although most characters just call him Mr. Krabs. He is, in every visible way, a small red crustacean with money on his mind. His daughter Pearl is a whale, specifically a sperm whale, which is one of the largest types of whale in the entire ocean. She is tall enough to bump her head on the ceiling of the family home. She is wider than every other character in the show combined. She has blowholes on top of her head. She makes deep, low whale noises when she gets emotional. Her tears come out in massive waterfalls that flood entire rooms. She is, by every visible measure, a giant marine mammal. These 2 characters live together in the same house. They are father and daughter. Mr. Krabs raised her on his own, paid for her clothes, walked her to her first day of school, and continues to spoil her with the very money he so carefully hoards from everyone else. Pearl, in turn, calls him daddy, lives in his home, attends Bikini Bottom High School, and stands to inherit the entire Krusty Krab business when she is older. Nobody in the show ever points out that this makes no sense. Not once, in over 2 decades of episodes, does any character on screen sit down and ask the obvious question: how does a small red crab have a giant teenage whale for a daughter? The show simply skips over the issue. It plays the relationship straight, like any normal father and daughter, and dares the audience to ask about the part it refuses to explain. And the audience has asked. For more than 25 years, this has been one of the most asked questions about SpongeBob SquarePants. Letters poured in, online forums filled up with theories. Fans wrote essays and made videos and drew family trees trying to figure it out. There had to be an answer. There had to be a story. Somewhere, deep in the show's hidden lore, there had to be a person responsible for the existence of Pearl. There had to be a Mrs. Krabs. The show has never shown her, not once. In hundreds and hundreds of episodes, in 3 full-length movies, in a Broadway musical, in spin-off series, in books, in video games, in 25 years of merchandise, the character of Mrs. Krabs has never appeared on screen. Not as a flashback, not as a photograph, not even as a shadow on a wall. She is by far the most discussed character in SpongeBob who has never actually been seen. There is a reason for that. The reason is Stephen Hillenburg. From the very beginning, going back to the earliest days of the show in the late 1990s, Stephen had a personal rule. He was strongly against the idea of ever putting Mrs. Krabs on screen. He felt that some mysteries in the show were better left as mysteries. He thought the strange relationship between Mr. Krabs and Pearl, the obvious mismatch between father and daughter, the unspoken question hanging over the family, was funnier and more interesting if it never got an answer. So he made the decision. The mother stays unseen, always. This was not a casual choice. According to Vincent Waller, who took over as the showrunner in later years and worked closely with Stephen for a long time, the team received many letters from fans over the years asking for an origin story for Pearl. People wanted to know. People wrote into the show begging for it. Steven said no every time. He held the line. He did not want it explained. There is a real story, confirmed by people who worked on the show, of just how close the audience once came to getting an answer. At one point, during the production of season 5, the writing team actually drafted a plot outline for a special double-length episode. The episode would have revealed the full origin of Pearl. It would have shown how she came to be part of the Krabs family. It would have, finally, in some way, addressed the identity of her mother. The outline started early development. Storyboards were considered. The episode was put on the path toward production. Then, Steven heard about it. He did not approve. The episode was put on hold. The development was stopped. The plot outline was set aside. According to Vincent Waller, the episode will never be finished. It is, somewhere in a folder in a SpongeBob office, a script for an answer that the show's own creator decided the world should never get to see. Even now, with Steven no longer alive, the people who carry on his work have largely respected this rule. The show has never tried to backtrack on it. The mother remains absent. The mystery remains unsolved. The closest the show has ever come to even directly mentioning Mrs. Krabs as a character was in a much later episode called Married to Money, in which Mr. Krabs tells Pearl that he might have found her a new mom. Pearl, deeply upset by the idea, immediately rejects it. The mention is short. The show moves on. No information about the original mother is given. The whole exchange treats her like a wound the family does not want to open. But the show is not a complete blank wall on this. Quietly, around the edges of the official cartoon, official material has actually answered part of the question, just enough to make the picture even more confusing. In the year 2000, while Steven was still the showrunner, a former episode writer for SpongeBob named David Fain wrote a small book called the SpongeBob SquarePants Trivia Book. The book was an officially licensed product, sold in stores, with the blessing of Nickelodeon. It included a wide range of small facts about the show, presented in a fun, simple format for kids. Inside this book, the question of Pearl's mother gets, of all things, an answer. In a section of the book, written from the point of view of Mr. Krabs himself, he explains why his daughter is a whale rather than a crab. The line he gives is short and simple. He says that Pearl is a whale because she takes after her mother that way. That single small sentence, hidden inside a children's book, is the closest thing the show has to an official explanation. It confirms in writing that Mrs. Krabs is also a whale. It confirms that Pearl is biologically the daughter of Mr. Krabs and a whale. It confirms that the mother existed, that she had something to do with Pearl looking the way she does, and that the strange mismatch between father and daughter is meant to be explained by this fact alone. That is it. That is everything the show has ever officially given on the subject. A single line in a small book, published 25 years ago, written from the point of view of the character himself, saying that Pearl looks like her mom did. Beyond that, total silence. The line is also almost certainly a small joke. One of Mr. Krabs' most famous catchphrases throughout the entire show is the exclamation, "Mother of Pearl." He says it whenever he is shocked or surprised or upset by something. The phrase is, in real life, an old expression that refers to the shiny inside layer of certain seashells. But in the context of Mr. Krabs, who actually has a daughter named Pearl, the line takes on an extra meaning. The show seems to be playing a long, quiet pun. Mr. Krabs keeps shouting "Mother of Pearl" again and again, while never once showing the audience the actual Mother of Pearl. The joke is built into his speech. The trivia book is not the only piece of official material that has hinted at the mother's existence. Various Nickelodeon magazines, especially in the United Kingdom, have run small features over the years listing Mrs. Krabs as a member of the Krabs family on character fact sheets. Once, around 2008, a British SpongeBob magazine actually invited child readers to send in their own drawings of what they thought Mrs. Krabs might look like. The winning drawings were printed in later issues. So in a strange way, the only Mrs. Krabs that have ever been shown publicly are the ones drawn by children decades ago in a magazine at the invitation of the show's own publishers. The actors involved in the show have also been asked about her over the years, often as a bit of a joke. At a 2015 panel event, the voice actress for Pearl, Lori Allen, was asked directly about the location of Pearl's mother. She gave a careful answer, saying the whereabouts were a secret. Roger Bumpus, the voice of Squidward, who was sitting next to her, decided to answer the question on her behalf. He joked that Mrs. Krabs had been taken to SeaWorld, the chain of marine theme parks where whales are sometimes held in captivity. The audience laughed. The joke joke was clearly not meant to be canon, but it does point at something the show itself has hinted at over the years, which is that whatever happened to Mrs. Krabs, it was not happy. Photographs in the Krabs family home, especially in the episode Selling Out, show a young Pearl as a baby. In every one of those baby pictures, Mr. Krabs is the only parent visible. He is shown holding her, feeding her, taking care of her on his own. The mother is never in the frame. In the episode Bossy Boots, the show makes it clear that Mr. Krabs had to teach Pearl all sorts of basic whale skills, including breaching, the whale behavior of leaping out of the water, by himself, without any help. The pictures and the small details paint the picture of a single father raising his daughter alone for a very long time. Whatever happened to Mrs. Krabs, it appears to have happened when Pearl was very small. Many fan theories have tried to fill in the gap over the years with their own answers. The most common and the most heartbreaking of them is what fans call the whaling theory. In real life, whales have been hunted by humans for centuries, often using long, sharp hooks attached to ropes. In SpongeBob, there is a season 1 episode called Hooky, in which Mr. Krabs gives a serious, frightened warning to SpongeBob and Patrick about the dangers of fishing hooks coming down from the surface. He tells them that hooks are not toys, that getting caught by one ends in disaster, and he speaks with a deep personal fear that does not match his usual greedy, cheerful self. Some fans have suggested that this fear is personal because Mr. Krabs lost his wife to a hook from the surface. The theory goes that Mrs. Krabs, a whale swimming in the open ocean, was caught by a whaling boat, and that Mr. Krabs took baby Pearl and raised her on his own from that point on. The theory fits with the photographs in the family home, with Mr. Krabs' strange fear of hooks, with Pearl's lack of any baby memories of her mother, and with the heavy sadness that sometimes drifts through the family in quiet moments. It would also explain why Mr. Krabs spoils Pearl so much, despite his obsession with money. He could not save the mother. He can spend his life giving everything he has to the daughter. This theory is not canon. The show has never confirmed it. Stephen Hillenburg never accepted it. The official line, the only official line, is what the trivia book said. Pearl takes after her mother, who was also a whale, and that is all the audience is ever going to officially get. There is a reason it has stayed that way. Stephen, even when he was approached again and again over the years to give the answer, knew something about how this kind of mystery works. The moment the show actually shows the mother, the moment a face is given to the question, all the wonder collapses. People build up a character in their heads. Decades of imagination create a Mrs. Krabs in millions of different forms, each one carrying whatever meaning the fan needs her to carry. A real on-screen reveal could never live up to that. It could only disappoint. The mystery, kept locked away, is more powerful than any answer the show could ever actually deliver. In other words, the unseen Mrs. Krabs is more important to the story by being missing than she could ever be by being present. Stephen understood this. He held the line until his dying day. The team that has continued the show after his passing has, by and large, kept that line in place. The mother stays gone. The questions stay unanswered. The catchphrase, Mother of Pearl, keeps echoing through the show. Every time Mr. Krabs is shocked, every time something surprises him. The phrase has now passed into popular culture, repeated by people who have never even watched the show, and every single time anyone says it, anywhere in the world, they are unknowingly speaking the name of a character who has never once stepped into the light. Pearl, for her part, will probably never know exactly who her mother was. The audience will probably never find out either. The show has made its peace with the mystery, and so, slowly, has the world. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. Mr. Krabs has his secrets. Pearl has her secrets too. But there is at least one main character in Bikini Bottom whose own existence, whose very age, whose whole basic identity is even harder to pin down than the mystery of Pearl's mother. Every official source about him says something different. Every time the show tries to nail down a number, the show ends up contradicting itself one episode later. There is a date written down on a small plastic card in his wallet that, if you do the math, suggests he should not even be old enough to have his own job, much less his own house. The character is the one the show is named after, and nobody, not even the people who made him, can quite agree on how old he actually is. Section 6. How old is SpongeBob? The most asked question the show refuses to answer. There is a small plastic card sitting somewhere in the world of Bikini Bottom. It is the size of a real-world driver's license. It is white, with simple black text printed on the front. It carries a name, an address, an expiration date, and most importantly, a birthday. The license belongs to SpongeBob SquarePants. It appears in his hand, in his wallet, in his pocket, in different episodes throughout the show, and the date written on it has caused more confusion among fans than almost any other small detail in the entire series. The date reads July 14th, 1986. For most people watching SpongeBob, this should be a perfectly simple piece of information. A character has a birthday. The show has shown it to us. End of story. Except this is SpongeBob, and nothing about this character's age has ever been simple. The moment you start doing the math, the moment you actually try to use that birthday to figure out how old SpongeBob is supposed to be, the entire framework of the show starts to crack open in your hands. Here is the problem. SpongeBob SquarePants premiered officially on May 1st, 1999. The first full episode of the show, called Help Wanted, aired on that date after the Kids' Choice Awards. The episode shows SpongeBob applying for and getting a full-time job at the Krusty Krab. He cooks burgers. He runs a register. He pays for his own house, a pineapple in the middle of town. He owns a pet snail. He drives, or attempts to drive, his own boat. He is presented in every visible way as a working adult living his own independent life. But if SpongeBob was born on July 14th, 1986, and the show began airing in May of 1999, the math says he was 12 years old when the show premiered, almost 13. By the time the episode Sleepy Time aired later in season 1, the year 2000, SpongeBob would have been 13, going on 14. A 13-year-old does not legally have a job in the United States. A 13-year-old does not legally drive a car. A 13-year-old does not own a pineapple house. The math does not just stretch reality. The math destroys reality. If you take the birthday seriously, then nothing else about the show makes any sense at all. The license itself first appears in the season 1 episode Sleepy Time. In that episode, SpongeBob falls asleep and has a long dream in which he hops between the dreams of his friends and neighbors. At one point during the dream, his driver's license appears clearly on screen, with all the information visible, including that strange birthday. The license shows up again in another episode called No Free Rides. This time, it is not part of a dream. It is being officially handed to him by Mrs. Puff after a boating school test. The same birthday is on it, July 14th, 1986. 2 appearances in 2 separate episodes with the exact same date. By the rules of how cartoons usually work, this should be canon. This should be the official answer. SpongeBob was born on July 14th, 1986, and that is that. But Stephen Hillenburg, when fans began pointing this out, gave a strange and quiet answer. He pointed out that the license first appeared in a dream sequence. Dreams in cartoons, he suggested, do not have to follow the same rules as real life. The number on the license, in the world of the show, might just be something SpongeBob saw in his sleep, not an actual fact about his life. The same date showing up later in No Free Rides was, perhaps, just a small mistake by the animators, copying the same image of the license without changing the number. After those 2 episodes, something even stranger happened. In every later episode where SpongeBob's license is shown, the birthday is no longer there. In an episode called Girls' Night Out, the date has been simply removed from the card. The space where it used to sit is blank. The animators, it seems, made a quiet decision to never show the date again. The license still appears. The expiration dates still get updated, sometimes saying the license is good until 2003, sometimes 2010, sometimes 2017, but the birthday itself has been wiped clean. In a Turkish SpongeBob magazine published in May of 2009, an article tried to officially address the contradiction. The article claimed that the birthday on SpongeBob's license was not real, because he had only seen it in a dream. This explanation, while it does line up with what Stephen had said, does not quite work either, because the same date appeared again in No Free Rides, an episode that has nothing to do with dreams. So the audience is left with a strange situation. The show once gave SpongeBob an exact birthday. The show then stopped giving it. The creator suggested it might not have been canon to begin with, and the math behind it, if you take it seriously, breaks the entire premise of the show. So fans turn to other clues to try to work out how old SpongeBob actually is. The first clue is his job. SpongeBob is a fry cook at the Krusty Krab. In the United States, the minimum age to legally work a job like that, especially around hot equipment, is generally 14 or 15, with limits on the number of hours children that age can work. SpongeBob works long hours, sometimes overnight shifts. He has worked at the Krusty Krab for years. He is the assistant manager in some episodes. None of that fits a child. The second clue is his house. SpongeBob owns a pineapple. He pays bills. He keeps his own pet. He has his own keys. He hosts adult-style cooking parties and fancy dinners and movie nights. None of this is the life of a child. Children do not own homes. The third clue is his grandmother. In the season 2 episode called Grandma's Kisses, SpongeBob visits his grandmother and gets a kiss from her, the kind grandmothers give to small children. Squidward and the customers at the Krusty Krab tease him about this, suggesting that a grown-up should not be getting kisses from his grandmother in public. SpongeBob, deeply upset, decides to act more grown-up. By the end of the episode, his grandmother has gently told him that he is, in her words, an adult and a grown-up. The whole episode is built around the idea of SpongeBob being a young adult, who is struggling to figure out which parts of childhood he is allowed to carry into adulthood. The grandmother, in this story, makes the show's stance clear. SpongeBob is grown. The fourth clue is Pearl. Pearl, as covered earlier, attends Bikini Bottom High School. In the season 1 episode, The Chaperone, SpongeBob is asked to escort Pearl to her junior prom. In a season 4 episode called Whale of a Birthday, Pearl celebrates her 16th birthday. SpongeBob, in both episodes, is treated as visibly older than Pearl. He is not a classmate of hers. He is a young adult helping out. He is older than a high school junior, and he is older than a 16-year-old. That puts him, by simple comparison, somewhere in his late teens or early 20s. Stephen Hillenburg himself, when asked directly about SpongeBob's age, gave a half-joke as an answer that has now become part of the show's lore. He said that SpongeBob is 50 years old in sponge years. The line was meant to be funny, but it points at something interesting. Real yellow tube sponges, the actual type of sea sponge SpongeBob is based on, can live for over 100 years. By that math, 50 would put SpongeBob right in the middle of his life, which is to say, an adult in his prime. In a more serious moment, Steven also said something else about the character. He said SpongeBob has no specific age, but that he is old enough to be on his own, and still old enough to be going to driving school. That answer, while not putting a number on it, draws the line clearly. SpongeBob is an adult. He just happens to be one who has not yet passed his driving test. This brings up another mystery. Why is SpongeBob, an adult, still attending a school for driver's lessons in the first place? The reason is one of the most famous behind-the-scenes stories in SpongeBob history. When Steven first pitched the show to Nickelodeon, the executives at the channel had a serious problem with his concept. They wanted SpongeBob to be a child, not an adult. They wanted the main character to be young, because the channel was a kids channel, and they thought a kid character would attract more young viewers. Steven completely disagreed. He had always seen SpongeBob as an adult. He had based the character on the working life of an adult man, with an adult's job and an adult's home. To make him a child would change everything. The argument became serious. Steven has said in interviews that he was actually about to walk away from Nickelodeon. He was prepared to give up on the entire show, rather than turn his adult character into a kid. Eventually, both sides found a compromise. The compromise is the entire reason a school exists in the show at all. Steven agreed to put SpongeBob in a school setting, but he made the school a boating school, a school where adults learn to drive boats, Mrs. Puff's boating school. That way, SpongeBob could be in classroom scenes, which gave Nickelodeon what they wanted, but he could still be an adult, which gave Steven what he wanted. This compromise is also why one of the unspoken rules of the show is that SpongeBob can never permanently pass his driving test. If he ever fully got his license, Mrs. Puff would have no reason to remain a character. The school would close. The classroom-style episodes would disappear. So in episode after episode, year after year, season after season, SpongeBob fails his test. He is given a license. Something happens. The license gets revoked. He goes back to school. The cycle continues. It is built into the basic structure of the show, and it has nothing to do with SpongeBob's actual age. It is the leftover trace of an old argument between a creator and a network, made visible in cartoon form. There is one more wrinkle to all of this. In recent years, Nickelodeon has begun to release new shows set in the world of SpongeBob, including a prequel series called Camp Coral, which shows SpongeBob and his friends as small children at a summer camp. This series treats SpongeBob as a young child, which contradicts everything Steven ever said about the character being an adult. Steven, by the time the show was made, had passed away and was no longer there to push back against the idea. The series exists in a strange space. It uses the SpongeBob characters, but it places them in a childhood setting that the original show would have rejected. Vincent Waller, who runs the main SpongeBob show now, has said in interviews that the timeline of the show has never really been chronological. chronological. By that he means that the events of one episode do not necessarily happen before or after the events of another. The show floats. It does not move forward in real time. SpongeBob is, in some sense, always in the same moment. He is always a fry cook. He is always trying to get his license. He is always living in his pineapple. The show does not age him. It does not move him through life. He simply exists, day after day, in the same eternal present. The Broadway musical version of SpongeBob, however, gave fans one more solid official fact. In the songs and dialogue of the musical, SpongeBob's exact species is identified. He is, the show confirms, a yellow sea sponge of the type known by scientists as Aplycina fistularis. This is a real species of sponge that lives in tropical waters, often in the Caribbean and parts of the Pacific. It grows in tube-like clusters and turns yellow as it matures. So even though SpongeBob looks like a flat kitchen sponge, he is officially modeled on a real, living animal that exists in the ocean today. An animal Steven would have known well from his marine biology training. Put it all together, and the picture is impossibly contradictory. SpongeBob has a written birthday that makes him a child. He has a job, a home, and a life that make him an adult. He attends a driving school for grown-ups. His grandmother calls him grown-up. He is older than a 16-year-old whale. He has been frozen in time for over 25 years and has not aged a day. He is, by the show's own internal admission, 50 years old in his species' lifespan. He is, somehow, every age and no age at the same time. In the end, the show simply does not want you to know. The age question is one the show keeps quietly walking past, refusing to answer, dodging the math whenever it comes up. SpongeBob is whatever age the current episode needs him to be. If the joke works better with a younger SpongeBob, the show treats him like a kid. If the joke works better with an older SpongeBob, the show treats him like a grown man. Both interpretations are equally true because neither is fully true. The character is held in a kind of suspended animation, a sponge-shaped mystery, drifting through 25 years of stories without ever quite landing on a real number. The driver's license still exists, somewhere in the show's history. The date is still there in those two old season 1 episodes, frozen forever in the moment they aired. July 14th, 1986. A birthday for a character who, by all official explanations, may not have one at all. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. A sponge with no real age, a neighbor with the wrong species, a boss with an impossible daughter. The closer you look at the cast of Bikini Bottom, the stranger they get. But the strangeness of the characters is only one part of the show's hidden world. There is another layer underneath, a layer that goes beyond the day-to-day life of the characters and into something far older, far darker, and far more supernatural. A layer where ghosts walk the streets of Bikini Bottom, where dead pirates haunt the ocean, where a fry cook with a spatula for a hand is rumored to return every Tuesday night looking for the next person to cross his path. Section 7. The Hash-Slinging Slasher, the Flying Dutchman, and Bikini Bottom's Hidden Mythology. Most of the time, Bikini Bottom is a sunny place. The sky overhead glows blue, the sand is bright, jellyfish drift by in soft glowing clouds. The Krusty Krab does its slow, steady business. Kids ride the rides at Glove World. Squidward complains about the noise. Patrick stares at the wall. SpongeBob sings to himself while walking to work. But the show has another side, a quieter, older, much darker side, one that comes out only at certain times, in certain episodes, on certain nights. A side full of ghosts and monsters and old curses, full of pirates trapped between worlds, full of stories about people who died doing the same boring jobs the main characters now do every day. Underneath the cheerful surface, the show has been quietly building a real supernatural world for over 25 years. Most kids who grew up watching SpongeBob can name at least one of these ghosts off the top of their head, even if they cannot remember where they saw them. The most famous of all of them is the Hash-Slinging Slasher. The story begins in a season 2 episode called Graveyard Shift. The episode first aired on September 6th, 2002. It was written by Doug Lawrence, Jay Lender, and Dan Povenmire. The setup is simple. Mr. Krabs, always looking for ways to make more money, decides to keep the Krusty Krab open 24 hours a day. SpongeBob is excited about this. Squidward is, as expected, miserable. The two of them are stuck working a long, slow, late-night shift together with no customer customers in sight. To pass the time, and to mess with SpongeBob a little, Squidward decides to tell a scary story. He invents a ghost on the spot. He gives the ghost a name, the hash-slinging slasher. So now, every Tuesday night, his ghost returns to the Krusty Krab, riding back from the world of the dead on the very same bus that killed him, hunting for unsuspecting victims to take with him. Squidward then tells SpongeBob the 3 signs that the ghost is approaching. First, the lights will flicker on and off. Second, the phone will ring, but no one will be on the other end of the line. Third, the bus that killed him will pull up outside the restaurant, and his shadowy figure will step off, wielding his spatula hand, walking slowly toward the door. Squidward originally only mentions the Tuesday night part of the story after SpongeBob informs him that it is, in fact, currently a Tuesday night. What makes the story land is what happens next. SpongeBob, terrified, asks if it is true. Squidward, getting a little annoyed by SpongeBob screaming, admits that he made the whole thing up. He invented the slasher on the spot to scare SpongeBob. The story is fake. Then the lights start flickering. Then the phone rings, with no voice on the other end. Then a bus pulls up outside. Even though buses do not run that late, a shadowy figure steps off, holding what looks like a spatula, walking slowly through the dark toward the door of the restaurant. SpongeBob and Squidward, both terrified, hold each other and wait for the end. They say their last words to each other. The figure approaches the counter. He steps into the light. He is just a fish, a normal, harmless, slightly confused fish, trying to apply for a job. He is wearing his sleeve over his hand in a way that just happens to look like a spatula from a distance. The flickering lights, the eerie phone call, all of it has had a normal explanation the whole time. Even the bus turns out to have just been late on its route. The episode then ends with one final twist. The light switch in the corner of the room is being flicked on and off by a different ghost entirely. A pale, bald, frightening figure stands there, smiling in a strange way, playing with the switch. The character is Count Orlok, the famous vampire from a real silent horror film called Nosferatu, made all the way back in 1922. The animators of SpongeBob took the actual visual image of the vampire from that old film and pasted it directly into the cartoon. The episode aired on what would have been the 123rd birthday of the actor who played that vampire, Max Schreck, born September 6, 1879. The whole thing is a quiet love letter to old horror movies, sitting at the end of a children's cartoon. But the hash-slinging slasher, even though he was made up, never really left. The story Squidward told was so memorable, so creepy, so full of cartoon energy, that it became one of the most famous moments in the entire show. Children who watched the episode ended up actually believing in the slasher. The pronunciation game, where SpongeBob keeps mishearing the name and saying things like the sash-ringing slasher, the trash-thinging slasher, the mash-flinging slasher, became a real meme that has lived online for decades. The slasher's silhouette has appeared in the show's later seasons. Side characters reference him. He has shown up in SpongeBob video games as a small, unlockable enemy. The made-up ghost has, in a way, become real. The slasher is just one piece of a much bigger world. The show has another major ghost figure who is officially canon, has appeared in episode after episode, and has his own deep backstory. His name is the Flying Dutchman. The Flying Dutchman is named after a real piece of old folklore from sailor culture. In the original sea legends, the Flying Dutchman is a ghost ship doomed to sail the oceans forever, never able to come into port, captained by a man cursed for his sins. The ship has appeared in stories, paintings, and movies for hundreds of years. The SpongeBob version takes the legend and gives it a face. The Flying Dutchman of Bikini Bottom is a green pirate ghost with a glowing body, yellow eyes, a long beard, and a tail of mist where his legs should be. He carries a sword and a small bag marked with the word souls, where he keeps the spirits he has collected. He speaks with a thick West Country pirate accent. His voice is provided by the actor Brian Doyle Murray. According to the show's own lore, the Flying Dutchman lived a long time ago, died, and was never given a proper burial. Instead of being respectfully laid to rest, his body was used as a window display in a clothing store. Because of this disrespect, his spirit could not move on, and he was forced to sail the seas forever, gathering the souls of others as he went. He lives in a giant ship that floats in what the show calls the underwater sky, the open water above Bikini Bottom. Whenever he appears, a green thunderstorm gathers around him. The Dutchman first shows up in the season 1 episode Scaredy Pants. He appears again in many later episodes, including Shanghaied, where he kidnaps SpongeBob, Patrick, and Squidward and forces them to serve as his crew. That episode contains one of the darkest moments in early SpongeBob, a place called the Fly of Despair, a dimensional rift the Dutchman uses to banish people. Squidward falls into it. Patrick and SpongeBob get turned into pieces of fruit and chased through it by the ghost. The whole sequence is genuinely unsettling for a children's cartoon, and many fans remember it as one of the scariest moments of their childhood viewing. The Dutchman is not a one-note villain, though. The show treats him with surprising depth. In the Season 4 episode Ghost Host, he loses his ability to scare people and becomes deeply depressed, eventually moving in with SpongeBob as a couch potato roommate until SpongeBob helps him get his confidence back. The Dutchman has been shown to know complicated knot tying, having won an underwater knot tying contest for thousands of years in a row. He has dated other characters' aunts. He has shown jealousy, sadness, friendship, and humor. For a ghost meant to drag souls down to the underwater version of the afterlife, he is given a remarkable amount of personality. There are still other supernatural characters in the SpongeBob universe. There is Doodlebob, the angry living drawing of SpongeBob who comes to life when a magical pencil falls from the surface in the Season 2 episode Frankendoodle. There is the small, evil, cursed Krabby Patty in the episode Nasty Patty. There are ghost worms, sea bears, dimensional rifts, hypnosis fish, magical conch shells, ancient curses, Atlantis, time travel, and creatures from other planets. The show has slowly built one of the most populated supernatural worlds in any kid's cartoon, hidden quietly underneath all the silly fast food jokes and jellyfish songs. What ties all of this together is a strange and important fact about the show. The supernatural side of SpongeBob is not a sometimes thing. It is part of the world. Bikini Bottom is a place where ghosts are real, where pirates can come back from the dead, where ancient evil drawings can possess pencils, where a vampire from a 1922 horror film can show up at the end of a Tuesday night shift, flicking a light switch on and off, smiling at the audience. The show treats these elements as completely normal, as just another part of life under the sea, as something the characters react to with surprise, but never with disbelief. This may be one of the quiet reasons the show has lasted so long. Children who grew up on SpongeBob did not just learn the names of fast food workers and starfish. They learned the names of ghosts. They memorized the 3 signs of the hash-slinging slasher's arrival. They knew not to step into the Fly of Despair. They learned the rules of an entire mythology, sitting in living rooms after school while watching what looked, on the surface, like a silly cartoon. The mythology was wide. It was deep. It had its own internal rules. It had its own monsters. It had its own afterlife. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously, and it had its own family trees too. Trees that, in the case of one main character, kept twisting back on themselves in ways that did not always match up. Patrick Star, the cheerful pink starfish next door, has a family that the show has tried to explain at least 3 different times. Each time, it has come up with different parents, different siblings, different grandparents, different houses. The most loved goofball in Bikini Bottom has, hidden behind that simple smile, one of the most confusing and contradictory family histories of any character on the show. Section 8. Patrick's 2 families, the continuity mystery that splits the canon. Patrick Star lives under a rock. The rock sits on Conch Street, 2 doors down from SpongeBob's Pineapple, just past Squidward's stone face house. The rock is famous. It is one of the most well-known images in the entire show. Lifting that rock up reveals Patrick's home, where he sleeps, eats, and stares at the ceiling in deep, peaceful silence for hours at a time. The rock has not changed in 25 years. The family living underneath it, however, has changed quite a bit. In fact, depending on which episode you happen to be watching, Patrick has at least 2 completely different sets of parents, 2 different sisters, and 2 different grandparents. The show has built him not one family tree, but 2, each with its own characters, its own backstories, its own stories about who Patrick really is. And while most viewers know Patrick as a simple character who loves jellyfishing and napping, the people who tried to figure out his family history during the show's long run have been left with a real puzzle on their hands. The first version of Patrick's family appears all the way back in Season 2. In an episode called I'm with Stupid, which first aired in 2001, Patrick begins frantically cleaning his house. SpongeBob walks in to find him making sand furniture and panicking. Patrick explains that the next day is Starfish Day, a holiday for starfish to spend time with their families, and his parents are coming to visit. He confesses something painful to SpongeBob. His parents do not think he is very smart. He says that in their eyes, he is the dumb one one of the family, and he is dreading their visit because he is sure they will be disappointed in him again. SpongeBob, being SpongeBob, comes up with a plan. He will pretend to be even dumber than Patrick, so that when the parents arrive, Patrick will look smart by comparison. Patrick agrees. They practice. They get ready. Then a knock comes at the door. Two starfish are standing outside. They look the part. Both are pink, like Patrick, with the same general shape. SpongeBob and Patrick assume immediately that these are the parents. They put on their act. SpongeBob plays incredibly stupid. Patrick takes this as the green light to brag about being smart, to insult the parents, and to act as if he is the most genius starfish in the sea. The whole act ends in confusion when the real parents arrive. The starfish couple Patrick had been talking to all day were not actually his parents. They were just two random tourists named Marty and Janet, who had been told earlier in the episode that they were lost and that Patrick lived nearby. They had been mistaken for his real parents the entire time. The actual parents, named Herb and Margie Starr, finally show up at the end of the episode. They are happy to see Patrick, especially with his pants on, and the family settles in to celebrate Starfish Day together. So now the audience knows. Patrick's parents are named Herb and Margie. They are starfish, like him. They appear briefly, again, in a season 4 episode called Rule of Dumb, where they show up on a family tree. The show has officially given Patrick a mom and dad. For 5 years, that is the entire family Patrick has on the show. No siblings, no other relatives mentioned, just Herb and Margie. Then, season 7 happens, and the whole family tree gets thrown off balance. In an episode called Big Sister Sam, which aired in 2010, Patrick gets a knock on his rock. Standing outside is a large, loud, aggressive pink starfish named Sam. She is, the episode tells us, Patrick's older sister. She has come to visit. She is delighted to see her brother. She immediately tries to redecorate his rock by smashing it apart and rebuilding it. She destroys SpongeBob's house in the process. She also destroys Squidward's house. She speaks in broken, simple sentences, using words like brubber for brother, yellow square for SpongeBob, and big nose for Squidward. She is, in many ways, even more chaotic than Patrick himself. By the end of the episode, she leaves. Patrick is sad to see her go. The episode ends, and Sam is never seen again. But the existence of Sam creates a serious problem. Way back in the season 2 episode, Something Smells, which aired all the way back in 2000, Patrick had a small line of dialogue in passing. He said directly that he did not have a sister. The line was a small joke. Nobody at the time thought much of it. It was just one of many small character details mentioned and forgotten. Then, 10 years later, the show gave him a sister. The line in Something Smells and the entire plot of Big Sister Sam directly contradicted each other. Either Patrick had a sister or he did not. Both of these statements were now, officially, part of the show. Both episodes are canon. Both stories happened. Some fans have tried to explain it. The most common excuse offered is that Patrick simply forgot he had a sister. Patrick's lack of memory is one of his defining traits. He has, in other episodes, forgotten how to eat. He has forgotten his own name. He has forgotten where he lives. He has forgotten that the rock he sleeps under is, in fact, a rock. Compared to those memory failures, forgetting a sister is almost in character. The audience has often assumed that Patrick simply had no idea his sister existed when he made the original statement, and that her arrival in Big Sister Sam was as much of a surprise to him as it was to the rest of Bikini Bottom. Even by the standards of fan explanations, this is a stretch. Most viewers and many later writers and animators have simply quietly accepted that the show contradicted itself, the way it sometimes does, and moved on. But the family problem was about to get even more complicated, because in 2021, Nickelodeon launched a new spin-off show called The Patrick Star Show. The show was specifically about Patrick. It featured him hosting an imaginary talk show out of his parents' house. And in this new show, Patrick had an entirely new family. His parents, in The Patrick Star Show, are not Herb and Margie. They are named Cecil and Bunny Starr. Cecil is shown as a slightly clumsy starfish father who jumps from job to job and is, in many ways, very similar to his son. Bunny is shown as a loving but slightly overbearing mother, often cooking, often cleaning, sometimes working a strange job as a prison greeter. The two of them live with Patrick in a house shaped like a coffee pot. He also has a sister in this show, but she is not Sam. Her name is Squidina. She is much younger than Patrick, about 8 years old, and she serves as the producer of his imaginary talk show. The strange thing is that Squidina is not a starfish at all. She is a small, squid-shaped character, despite being his canonical sister. The show does not stop to explore explain how a starfish family ended up with a squid for a daughter, just as the original show never stopped to explain how a crab ended up with a whale for a daughter. The strangeness is just there. There is also a grandfather in the Patrick Star Show called Grandpat, who serves as a major character. He is presented as a much older starfish, full of long, sometimes nonsensical stories about the past. Unlike the rest of the family, Grandpat is often the one who gets frustrated with Patrick's stupidity, and he prefers to keep his distance from the chaos. So there are now 2 complete sets of Patrick's family living in the canon of the SpongeBob universe. The original starfish parents, Herb and Margie, who appear in I'm with Stupid and Rule of Dumb, and the spin-off parents, Cecil and Bunny, with Squidina and Grandpat, who appear in the Patrick Star Show. Both versions of these families have appeared together in some episodes of Camp Coral, the prequel series, suggesting that the show is at least trying to keep both versions alive somehow. The question of which one is the real family has no good answer. The simplest read is that the spin-off show simply rewrote Patrick's family for its own purposes, and that the original SpongeBob remains canon for Herb, Margie, and Sam. But the Patrick Star Show is officially licensed and produced by Nickelodeon, with the same voice actors as the main show. By every official measure, it is canon too. The contradictions go even deeper when you look at small details. The original starfish family lived in a small, starfish-style home. The spin-off family lives in a large, coffee pot-shaped house, which is a completely different kind of building. The original Patrick has no younger sister. The spin-off Patrick has Squidina as a younger sister. The original Patrick has Sam as an older sister. The spin-off Patrick does not. None of it lines up. Patrick's character design itself has its own backstory. Stephen Hillenburg picked the starfish for Patrick for a specific reason. He explained that he chose a starfish because real starfish, in his words, look dumb and slow on the outside, but underneath, they are very active and aggressive hunters. The contrast fit Patrick perfectly. From the outside, Patrick looks harmless. He looks lazy. He looks confused. But underneath, he is unpredictable, occasionally clever, capable of surprising bursts of energy, and even meanness when the moment calls for it. The slow, dumb look hides a complicated inner life, the same way a real starfish does. Hillenburg also said something important about Patrick's emotional swings. Patrick was originally written as cheerful all the time. The angry, mean version of Patrick that shows up in some episodes was originally meant for one specific Season 1 episode called Valentine's Day, where SpongeBob and Sandy try to give Patrick a gift, and Patrick has a public meltdown. According to one of the writers on the show, Jay Lender, that explosion of anger was supposed to be a one-time joke, but the team enjoyed the contrast so much, the strange dark side under the otherwise sweet character, that they kept letting it pop up again. The angry Patrick of later seasons, the one who often acts cruelly towards SpongeBob and Squidward, exists because the writers found that hidden side of him too interesting to leave alone. There is one more strange detail about Patrick. In the I'm with Stupid episode, the original episode that introduced Herb and Margie, the plot revolves around the cruel humor of mocking someone for being unintelligent. The episode was rated for younger children, like all SpongeBob episodes. But in August 2020, Amazon's streaming version of the show suddenly raised the age rating of I'm with Stupid to 13+. The decision was unexplained. Many fans believe it was tied to growing concerns about the way the episode treats stupidity as a punchline. By October of the same year, the rating had been quietly returned to its original setting, and the episode is now available like any other. So Patrick is the dumb, cheerful starfish next door, with 2 sets of parents, 2 sisters, a grandfather who only exists in the spin-off, a hidden mean streak the writers stumbled onto by accident, and an episode that the streamers briefly decided was too inappropriate for kids before changing their minds. He is, behind that simple pink smile, one of the messiest characters in the entire show to actually piece together. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. The contradictions in Patrick's family tree are public. They are easy to find. Anyone with a few episodes can spot them. But the show has other, quieter contradictions too. Episodes that have been pulled off the air. Episodes that have been removed from streaming. Episodes that exist only as old VHS tapes and DVDs, hidden in collectors' shelves, no longer airing on television. And then there are the episodes that, according to the strangest corner of the internet, were never supposed to exist in the first place. Episodes that, the story goes, leaked out of a Nickelodeon studio late one night, were watched in a small editing room by a small group of horrified workers bonkers and then disappeared forever. Section 9. The lost episodes that aren't, and the episodes that got lost. There is a strange shelf in the world of SpongeBob where the episodes that were never officially released sit next to the episodes that were officially released and then later quietly removed. On this shelf, real history sits next to internet folklore, and the line between them is not always easy to see. Some of these episodes were pulled by Nickelodeon for clear public reasons. Some were pulled and never properly explained. And one of them, the most famous of all, was never an actual episode in the first place. It was a story that millions of people came to believe was a real lost piece of the show. And the story has been quietly sitting in the dark corners of the internet for over 15 years, refusing to go away. The real removed episodes are easier to talk about. They actually exist. They have writers, animators, and air dates. They simply have been pulled from rotation by the company that owns them. The most famous of these is a season 3 episode called Midlife Crustacean. The episode first aired on January 24th, 2003, paired with a sister segment called Snail Race. It is widely considered one of the funniest episodes of the entire show. It centers on Mr. Krabs going through what humans would call a midlife crisis. He wakes up depressed about getting older. He hears a song on his clock radio that reminds him how much time has passed. He asks Pearl if she thinks he is old. He tries to use young slang to fit in, with embarrassing results. By the time he gets to work, a customer at the Krusty Krab compares him to an old and dried out Krabby Patty, and Mr. Krabs has had enough. He decides he wants to feel young again. He asks SpongeBob and Patrick if he can join them for their big night out. The two of them agree. The night, however, turns out to be a long string of strange, childlike activities. They watch laundry tumble in a laundromat. They play role-playing games. They go to the dentist. They do various silly things, with SpongeBob and Patrick repeatedly asking, "Are you feeling it now, Mr. Krabs?" He keeps saying no. He keeps not feeling it. He is about ready to give up and go home when Patrick mentions that the night will end with a panty raid. That single phrase is what eventually got the episode pulled. In the episode, the trio sneak into a woman's house and steal her underwear. The whole sequence plays as a strange, awkward joke. Then comes the twist. The woman whose underwear they have stolen turns out to be Mr. Krabs' own mother. She catches him. She grounds him. The episode ends with Mr. Krabs being treated like a small child, sent to his room. Lesson learned. The line about feeling it became one of the most quoted moments in SpongeBob history. It is still a popular meme today. The whole episode was loved by fans and ranked highly in best of lists for years. But by 2018, the network decided that the panty raid plotline was no longer appropriate for a children's show, especially in the wake of broader cultural conversations about respecting women. Nickelodeon quietly took Midlife Crustacean out of its normal television rotation. It just stopped airing. No big announcement was made. Fans only noticed slowly that they were not seeing it on TV anymore. A few years later, the episode was also pulled from streaming. When Paramount Plus launched in 2021, viewers noticed that Midlife Crustacean was missing. After some questions from the press, a Nickelodeon spokesperson confirmed that the episode had been pulled because some story elements were not considered kid-appropriate. The episode was also removed from Amazon Prime Video shortly after. In 2023, the episode briefly reappeared on Paramount Plus through Amazon, before Paramount confirmed this had been a technical error and pulled it again. The episode is still available on older DVDs, including the complete third season set, but on streaming services, it remains officially missing. A second episode also got pulled, although for very different reasons. In season 12 of the show, an episode called Quarantined Crab was set to premiere. The episode involved a fast-spreading sickness called clam flu sweeping through Bikini Bottom. The Krusty Krab is forced into a quarantine, with the health inspector trapping all the customers inside. People who are suspected of being sick are stuffed into freezers. Tempers explode. The episode was written and produced years before the world had ever heard of COVID-19. Then the COVID-19 pandemic hit in early 2020. Nickelodeon, looking at an episode about a contagious illness sweeping a city while a real contagious illness was sweeping the actual world, made the decision to delay the episode. It was originally meant to air in 2020. Instead, it sat on the shelf. The episode was finally allowed to air in 2022, when the timing felt less raw. Today, it is available like any other episode, but for 2 years, it existed in a kind of limbo, finished but unplayed, simply because the timing was unbearable. A third episode had a small banning issue, this time only in certain countries. The season 2 episode, Gary Takes a Bath, includes a small moment where SpongeBob shows off of 2 bars of soap and calls them doubloons. The reference is to a small object kids might recognize from pirate stories. For reasons that have never been completely clear, the moment was deemed inappropriate in the United Kingdom and Australia, and the episode was banned from television in those regions. It still aired normally in the United States. These are the real removed episodes. There are clear records of when they aired, who wrote them, what was cut, and why. They exist on tapes, on discs, in archives, and in the memories of viewers who saw them when they originally aired. Then there is the other one, the most famous lost SpongeBob episode of all time. The one that, despite being repeated, retold, and watched by millions of people, has never actually existed. The story is called Squidward's Suicide, sometimes also called Red Mist. It first appeared online on a website called the Creepypasta Wiki around 2010. Creepypasta is a type of internet horror story, usually written by anonymous authors and shared on forums. The Squidward suicide story claims to be told from the point of view of a fictional intern who worked at Nickelodeon Studios in 2005. The intern, the story says, was sitting in an editing room one day with a small group of animators and sound editors. They were watching a copy of an upcoming Season 4 episode that was supposed to be called Fear of a Krabby Patty. According to the story, the title that came up on the screen was different. It read Squidward's Suicide. The team thought it was a joke title, the kind animators sometimes put on rough cuts as an inside joke. They kept watching. The episode in the story begins normally. Squidward is practicing his clarinet, SpongeBob and Patrick are laughing outside, Squidward gets ready for a concert. The concert goes badly. The audience boos him. So far, it sounds like a normal SpongeBob episode. Then, the story says, the audience members begin to look strange. Their eyes change. Squidward goes home, sits on the edge of his bed, and starts crying. The crying does not sound like a cartoon. It sounds, in the story, like a real person sobbing. The screen flickers, the sounds get louder, and the story describes a series of disturbing images appearing throughout the episode. Images that do not belong in any cartoon ever made for kids. Images that horrify the staff watching it. The story claims that the team called Stephen Hillenburg himself down to look at the tape. The story claims he watched, said nothing, and walked out of the room. The story ends with the suggestion that the episode was confiscated by police, and that the people responsible for hiding the disturbing material inside it were never caught. The whole story is fiction. There is no Fear of a Krabby Patty episode in Season 4. There is no intern named Chaz Agnew. There is no Red Mist tape. The Creepypasta Wiki itself, which hosts the story, openly lists it as a creepypasta, meaning an internet horror story. None of it ever happened. But the story spread anyway. People posted videos online claiming to show the episode, but every one of those videos was made by amateur editors using clips from real SpongeBob episodes, with hand-edited disturbing content added in. None of these videos came from Nickelodeon. They were homemade attempts to recreate what the story described. The original story has no actual video to go with it. It is just a written piece of horror fiction. But the legend has grown so large over the years that many people genuinely believe it really exists, and millions of internet videos have been made about it. The legend has actually crossed paths with the real show in one strange moment. In Season 12, an episode called SpongeBob in Random Land briefly features a moment where Squidward opens a door and reveals a frightening face on the other side. The face was originally drawn to look strikingly similar to the famous still image associated with the Squidward suicide creepypasta. Fans noticed immediately. The animators had clearly nodded to the legend, even if they were not officially confirming anything. According to some sources, this scene was later edited or replaced, with a baby Squidward shown in some versions of the episode instead. The wink had gotten too close to the legend, and the show pulled back. There is something quietly fascinating about all of this. The real removed episodes, the ones that were genuinely pulled by Nickelodeon, have detailed paper trails and clear reasons. They are forgotten in the sense that they are no longer on the air, but they are easy to track down for anyone with a DVD player and patience. The fake removed episode, the one that never actually existed, is somehow even more famous than the real ones. The Squidward suicide story has been told and retold so often by so many people in so many languages that it has become part of the cultural memory of an entire generation. People who have never seen a single second of so-called video of it, because no real video of it exists, can still tell you what happens in it. The real lost SpongeBob and the imaginary lost SpongeBob now sit side by side. The episodes Midlife Crustacean and Quarantined Crab were quietly removed removed by a network worried about their content. The fake episode, Squidward's Suicide, was never made by anyone, but lives on in the strange corner of the internet where horror stories breed. All three exist in the same shelf in the back of the show's history. All three are, in their own way, missing, and all three are remembered. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. The story of the show that almost did not happen, the show built on a real nuclear test site, the show with the impossible whale daughter and the lost mother and the haunted fry cook, the show with the ghost pirate and the misnamed octopus and the contradicted family trees, has one more chapter to it. The story of the man who built it, the marine biologist who almost walked away from his own creation more than once, who returned to it, who built it the way he wanted, and who, in his final years, kept working on it for as long as his body would allow him to. His ending shaped the show as much as his beginning did, and what the show became after he was gone is, in many ways, the final mystery of all. Section 10. The End of the Pineapple. How Hillenburg's death changed everything. In the early 2000s, a few short years after SpongeBob first aired, Stephen Hillenburg began to feel something most television creators rarely allow themselves to feel. He felt finished. The show was a hit by then. The first season had been welcomed warmly. The second season had been even bigger. By the third season, SpongeBob was already a cultural phenomenon, the kind of show that filled toy aisles and took over breakfast cereal boxes and showed up on lunch boxes and school cafeterias all over the country. Nickelodeon had a runaway success on its hands, and the network wanted more of it. Steven had a different idea. He wanted to stop. He believed that the show had told the stories it needed to tell. He believed that pushing a comedy series past a certain point would slowly kill what made it special. He thought 3 seasons, plus a movie to wrap things up, was the right amount. He wanted to make a SpongeBob movie, give the characters a real ending, and walk away. The movie happened. The SpongeBob SquarePants movie came out in 2004. Steven wrote it, produced it, and directed it himself. He poured everything into it. The film ends with SpongeBob and Patrick finishing their journey, saving Bikini Bottom, and earning the respect of the adults around them. It was meant to be the final chapter. Steven always saw it that way. The story had a beginning. It had a middle. The movie was the end. Nickelodeon disagreed. The show was making the company an enormous amount of money. The merchandise alone was a small empire. Ending the show would mean walking away from one of the most valuable products on cable television. The executives at Nickelodeon wanted more episodes. Steven did not want to make them. The disagreement was deep, and it could not be resolved. So Steven made a hard choice. He stepped down as showrunner. He handed the day-to-day running of SpongeBob over to one of his trusted team members, Paul Tibbitt, who had worked on the show for years. Steven kept the title of executive producer, but he largely walked away from the writing room. He stopped going to the meetings. He stopped guiding every episode. He let the show continue without him. The show kept airing. New seasons came. New writers came in. New characters were created. New plot lines were tried. The episodes kept being made year after year, and they reached children who had not even been born when SpongeBob first premiered. Some of these episodes were good. Many fans of the show consider parts of Season 4 and Season 5 to still be high-quality work, but many fans also point to a clear shift in the show's tone during this period. Episodes began to feel meaner. Patrick was sometimes written as crueler. Squidward was tortured more often. SpongeBob himself sometimes became less innocent, more annoying, less the cheerful character Steven had originally drawn. The strange, gentle warmth of the early years began to thin out. Some of these episodes have become infamous in the SpongeBob fan community. Episodes whose names alone get strong reactions. Episodes that fans wish had never been made. Steven, even though he was not running the show anymore, was still alive during this period. He could see what was happening. Some of his old colleagues have since said that he did not love everything the show became while he was away from it. He spent the years away from SpongeBob doing other things. He worked on short films. He spent time with his family. He continued his quiet hobbies of surfing, snorkeling, scuba diving, and birdwatching. He also kept playing music with his son Clay, who had been born in 1998, the same year his father married Karen Hillenburg, the chef whose name had been borrowed for the character of Karen Plankton. Father and son would play music together, with Clay on drums, sometimes performing what Steven lovingly called noisy rock music. It was a normal life, away from the noise of the show. Then, in 2015, after almost 10 years away, Steven came back. A second movie had been planned, called The SpongeBob Movie, Sponge Out of Water. Steven wrote the story for it. After After the film was finished, he decided to return more fully. According to Vincent Waller, who had been at the show for years, Steven returned to nearly full involvement. He attended every recording session. He attended every writing meeting. He participated in every step of producing new episodes. The show belonged to him again. Then, in March of 2017, Steven revealed something that shook the entire SpongeBob family. He had been diagnosed with a disease called amyotrophic lateral sclerosis. Most people know it by its shorter name, ALS, or by another name, Lou Gehrig's disease. It is a slow disease that gradually affects the nerves that control the muscles. Over time, it makes movement, speech, and even breathing harder and harder. There is no cure. People who have it usually live only a few years after diagnosis. Steven made the announcement publicly, with grace. He said his family was grateful for the support. He asked for privacy. And then he said something that nobody who worked with him would ever forget. He said that he intended to keep working on SpongeBob for as long as he physically could. He did. For as long as his body allowed it, he kept showing up. He kept attending meetings. He kept guiding the show. As the disease progressed, his speech became harder. He began to have difficulty getting words out. He kept coming to work anyway. His colleagues described him during this time as a perfectionist. They described him as a kind man who did not want to talk about himself. They described him as someone who, even as he was getting weaker, kept doing the job he loved with care. Eventually, the illness made it too hard for him to continue going to the office. He stayed home. He kept his connection to the show as long as he could. The team kept working under his guidance. On November 26, 2018, Steven Hillenburg died at his home in San Marino, California. He was 57 years old. The cause of death was listed as ALS. He had married Karen for 20 years. His son Clay was 20 years old. His mother Nancy and his brother Brian Kelly Hillenburg also survived him. According to his death certificate, his body was cremated. The day after his death, his ashes were taken out to the Pacific Ocean and scattered into the water along the California coast. The marine biologist who had built a cartoon city on the floor of the Pacific Ocean was returned, in the end, to the same ocean that had inspired him for his entire life. The water that he had taught children about. The water he had once stood ankle deep in, holding a small bucket, talking about tide pools. The water that had given him SpongeBob in the first place. The reaction was enormous. Fans across the world mourned him. Cast members who had worked with him for nearly 20 years spoke about the kindness he had shown them. Tom Kenny, the voice of SpongeBob, had once said while accepting an Emmy that the joy and the playful spirit of SpongeBob came directly from Steven. Other animators who had known him wrote about how his work had changed the face of television. The Nickelodeon company released a statement saying that he was a beloved friend and a long-time creative partner, and that his original characters and his world of Bikini Bottom would long stand as a reminder of the value of optimism, friendship, and the limitless power of imagination. Then came the question of what to do with the show. While Steven was alive, he had been very clear about one thing. He did not want spin-offs of SpongeBob. He had told Paul Tibbitt directly that one of his deepest fears was that one day Nickelodeon would want to make a show called SpongeBob Babies, a kid version of the cast, and he had said that if that day ever came, he would walk away. He did not want anything else made out of the SpongeBob world. He wanted his characters to stay in their original show, in the original setting, in the original tone. After his death, Nickelodeon made decisions that went against this wish. Less than a year after Steven passed away, the company announced a new spin-off series called Camp Coral: SpongeBob's Underyears. The show was set in a summer camp where the SpongeBob characters were all young children. It was, in spirit, exactly the kind of project Steven had always rejected. The show was given a green light, written and produced after his death, without his approval. Many fans felt the move was disrespectful. Some former colleagues spoke out publicly, saying that Steven would have hated the project and that he would never have allowed it to be made if he had still been alive. Another spin-off, The Patrick Star Show, premiered in 2021. As covered earlier, this show created an entirely new family for Patrick, contradicting the family that had been established in the original series. A third movie, called The SpongeBob Movie: Sponge on the Run, was released in 2020. Steven received an executive producer credit on it after his death. The original SpongeBob series itself has continued without him. Vincent Waller and Mark Ceccarelli took over as the official showrunners. The show kept airing new episodes through season 13, season 14, season 15, and beyond. Some fans believe the recent seasons have actually been better than the post-movie years. Others believe the show has lost something it can never get back. The strange thing is that even as the show kept going, the deepest mysteries of SpongeBob remained the way Steven had wanted them. The mother of Pearl was never shown. The shelved origin story episode was never finished. The post-apocalyptic original concept of the show, the one Doug Lawrence revealed in the Esquire interview from 2024, the one where the entire surface of the world had been destroyed, leaving Bikini Bottom as the last living place on Earth, remained scrapped. The age of SpongeBob remained unanswered. The contradictions in Patrick's family stayed contradictions. The Squidward suicide story stayed in its strange corner of the internet, neither confirmed nor denied. The hash-slinging slasher remained a story Squidward made up that somehow felt real. The whole quiet web of unsolved questions that Steven had built into the show, deliberately, choice by choice, stayed unsolved. Some of this was simply because the people running the show after him knew that the questions were better left alone. They had been with Steven long enough to understand his thinking. They had watched him refuse to answer the same questions year after year through countless letters from fans, countless interviews, countless attempts to draw him out. They knew that the mystery itself was part of why the show worked. The not knowing was the magic. So now, almost 30 years after Steven first walked into Nickelodeon with a Hawaiian shirt and an underwater terrarium full of clay characters, his show is still on the air. New children are still discovering it. The original episodes are still being watched on streaming, on DVD, on television, on phones, on tablets, in living rooms and classrooms and bedrooms, in every country in the world. The pineapple is still standing. The Krusty Krab is still serving Krabby Patties. Squidward is still playing his clarinet badly. Patrick is still living under his rock. Pearl is still wondering, somewhere off screen, about a mother she will never meet. And every time the camera dives down through the water, past the surface, past the small ring-shaped island with 3 palm trees, past the calm blue currents of the Pacific Ocean, into the bright underwater town built quietly on top of the saddest patch of nuclear history of the 20th century, a marine biologist who is no longer alive is, in his own quiet way, still teaching, still showing children what lives at the bottom of the sea, still drawing his comic in 100 new ways every single week on a network he was once ready to walk away from. The mysteries are still mysteries. The unfinished stories are still unfinished. And the small yellow sponge, who was almost never named SpongeBob, who was almost never an adult, who was almost never made, keeps waking up every morning in his pineapple, ready for another day at work, exactly the way Steven Hillenburg had always wanted him to. If you enjoyed this video essay, make sure to subscribe. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.